Commission is just ask for those of you in person that I just walk around and see who's not paying attention. So, and I will tell you, if you're not going to laugh at that joke, the jokes just get worse. They do. But those are some preliminary issues. If you have any questions, I'm here all day. Please let me know, or any of our planning committee team know. We would be happy to address that. And again, thank you for being here. Our next speaker, before I bring him up, I'll just let you know that he joins us from Miami-Dade County, where he's an associate administrative judge. He established the 11th Judicial Circuit Criminal Mental Health Project in 2000 and has been involved in various committees and projects that have truly transformed Florida's mental health system. He also contributes at a collegiate level as a professor and serves on numerous national initiatives to address the intersection of the criminal justice system and the behavioral health world. I will tell you that Judge Leifman received the prestigious William H. Rehnquist Award presented to him at the United States Supreme Court by Chief Justice John Roberts in 2015. It's also been featured on CNN, CBS News, USA Today, as well as the feature of the PBS national documentary, The Definition of Insanity, hosted by Rob Reiner. Now, if you Google search Judge Leifman, everything I just said you will find. But I want to let you know one more thing that you won't find on a Google search. And that is that in the fall of 2019, I heard for the first time someone speak on the issue of the intersection of the criminal justice system, of the justice system as a whole, and the behavioral health world. It was the first time I'd heard it, and I was moved. I was moved to ask myself the question, what can I do? I was moved to ask myself, is there a better solution? I was moved to take a step forward and get involved. And it was because it started there with Judge Leifman that stirred in me. I heard a presentation very similar to the presentation that you're about to hear. And it is my hope that you will have that same response in wondering, investigating, and examining, is there a better solution? So without further delay, please welcome to the stage the Honorable Judge Stephen Leifman.
I better not move these notes around or it could be a real problem for Judge Winnell. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, and Judge Winnell, thank you so much not only for that very thoughtful and warm introduction, but for the remarkable work that you have done to organize this phenomenal event. I also want to thank the Governor, the Chief Justice, your President of the Senate, and Speaker of the House for being here today. It's easy to take these types of initiatives for granted when you have all branches together, but it really is quite unique. And it really sends the message that I think is extraordinarily important for all of us. And that is, there is not one person, one party, one institution that created this issue, and there's not one person, one party or institution that's going to fix it. It truly takes this amazing collaboration between all the different branches, between all the different stakeholders to fix this problem. And the good news is, it is very fixable. I think what you learn after several years of being on the bench is that in many ways, the criminal justice system is the repository of many failed public policies. And there is no greater failed public policy in this country than our treatment towards people with serious mental illnesses. It's interesting to listen to the speakers because all of us have had experiences when we were much younger that have kind of put us on this path to address this issue. And for me, mine started when I was 17 years old. I was an intern for a state legislator in Miami, and he had received a letter from the then editor of the Miami Herald about a young man who was at our local state psychiatric hospital. You see, my age directly corresponds to the deinstitutionalization movement in this country. So this is 45 years ago. So being the lowest person on the totem pole, I got selected to go to the state hospital and check out the situation. As I mentioned, I was 17 years old. I was pretty naive. I grew up a nice middle-class family. I had never seen anything bad in my life until I walked through the doors of the state hospital. It was everything you saw in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I found the young man that I was there to visit. He was in all 4-point restraints. He was probably 100 pounds overweight from the Thorazine that they were injecting him. And he was moaning, and he was screaming, and he was crying, and it was a scene out of a horror movie. This being way before HIPAA, I looked at his records, I talked to the staff. Even as a 17-year-old, I knew that something was terribly wrong here, because it turned out he did not have a psychotic illness, he was autistic. And while I was there, it turned out that there was a group of advocates visiting the facility, and they heard that there was a representative from a legislator's office, albeit a 17-year-old who had no power or no influence, but it was still something that they needed me to see. And they insisted I go on a tour of this facility. They took me downstairs, I remember it like it was yesterday, where I found these 7 men lying naked in their own feces in what looked like a jail cell, while a guard stood there with a hose washing them down like they were animals in a zoo. And this is why we shut down those hospitals. It left an indelible mark on me, and it opened my eyes to the sad and shameful history of mental illness that we had and have in this country. 17 years later, I was appointed to the bench, and the same horrors that I had witnessed in this state hospital, I was now witnessing at my jail directly across the street. So when I became a judge, I had no idea I was actually becoming the gatekeeper to the largest psychiatric facility in the state of Florida, the Miami-Dade County Jail. And while the United States is 4% of the world's population, we have 25% of the world's inmates. Think about that a moment. 1 out of every inmate in the world is housed in the United States. 70% of people in jail in this country either have a serious mental illness, a substance use disorder, or both, which makes us wonder, maybe we need specialty courts for the 30% that don't have a mental illness or substance use disorder, and we need a therapeutic jurisprudence system in our criminal justice system to address the 70% that keep coming back again and again and again. We spend over $1 trillion a year in this country to incarcerate people. Prior to the pandemic, 1 out of every 115 adult in the United States was behind bars, and 1 out of every 38 adult was under correctional supervision. Since 1980, the number of people going to jail and prisons has increased by 500%, and their sentences have increased by 166%. Much of these increases are due to untreated mental illnesses and substance use disorders. In fact, people with mental illnesses in the United States are 10 times more likely to be incarcerated than hospitalized. They are 19 times more likely to find a bed in the criminal justice system than at any state civil hospital. Annually, we have about 1.5 million people with serious mental illnesses arrested each year, and about 2 million incidents. And on any given day, there are about 380,000 people with serious mental illnesses behind bars, and another 574,000 under correctional supervision. A survey of 1,400 families from the National Alliance on Mental Illness found that 40% of their family members with severe mental illnesses had been arrested at least 1 or more times. And aside from the enormous human cost of using the criminal justice system as our de facto mental health system, the fiscal impact to government and taxpayers is astronomical, providing few, if any, positive outcomes. Miami-Dade County, my own community, spends $636,000 a day. That's $232 million a year to warehouse about 3,000 people a year with mental illnesses in our jail. My state only spends $47.3 million to provide mental health treatment for everybody in Dade and Monroe County, leaving almost 70,000 people without any access to treatment. The system is absolutely backwards. Annually, our counties collectively in the United States spend $26 billion on jails and another $63.5 billion on prison costs, and billions more to restore competency, so we just watch people bounce from one system to another. The situation is particularly shameful. Why? Because treatment works. We have a system problem more than we have a treatment problem. Most of the money we spend in this country related to mental illnesses is wasted on acute care treatment provided in institutional settings such as jails, hospitals, prisons, and competency restoration facilities. In fact, most states spend more money to incarcerate people with mental illnesses than to treat them. And we need to understand people with mental illnesses are no more dangerous than the general population. In fact, on medication, they are much less dangerous than the general population. Sadly, they are much more likely to be victims of violent crimes than perpetrators. And recovery rates for many people with mental illnesses is actually better than for most people with heart disease and diabetes. And we also have what we call comorbid issues. Not only does this population often have a serious mental illness, they often have very serious primary health issues. In fact, people with serious mental illnesses have higher rates of heart disease and cancer than people without serious mental illnesses. They are more likely to be admitted to hospitals, stay longer, and much less likely to have insurance. Paradoxically, the pandemic affords us a rare opportunity to finally address this crisis. As our jail populations have been significantly reduced because of COVID-19, our arrests are at an all-time low, and we need to take advantage of this opportunity to re-envision and restructure the delivery of our mental health services. We have lacked the political will, and we have lacked the opportune time to act. But as you see here today, we clearly have that opportunity to address these issues, and we can't lose this opportunity. And we know how to fix it. You don't have to start by overhauling the entire mental health system. You can just start by addressing those that are the highest users of mental health and criminal justice services in our system. Because the same high users in our criminal justice system are the same high users in our civil commitment that generally just go from one system to another. We had a study conducted when we started to put together our program in Miami, and we have this great university at the University of South Florida, and they have an institute called the Florida Mental Health Institute. And they have the ability to tell a community who the highest utilizers of both criminal justice and mental health services are. So they have these blended data sets of all the people arrested in Florida, all the people who go through civil commitment in Florida, and all the Medicaid and Medicare records. And so we sent them the names of 3,300 people who had been arrested in Miami-Dade, who had come through our system over a 5-year period that we knew we needed to do a better job to get our arms around. And we figured, hey, maybe if we can narrow it down to 1,000 people, that's at least manageable. And maybe we can make a dent in our system. So we send them the names. We wait and we wait and wait. And finally, this letter comes back, a very thin letter. I open it up. I'm like, whoa, it's one piece of paper. And on this one piece of paper were the names of 97 people, primarily men, primarily diagnosed with schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, primarily co-occurring, meaning they had both a mental illness and a substance use disorder, who over a 5-year period, these 97 people were arrested 2,200 times. They spent 27,000 days in the Dade County Jail, 13,000 days at a psychiatric program in our community. They cost taxpayers, in today's dollars, $17 million and we got nothing for it. I guarantee every one of your circuits have a 97, and all of you know who they are. Just like the example that your Chief Justice gave, this one guy from 30 years ago is still in our system. If you'd indulge me for one moment, I'd like to read from an article on mental health that I recently reviewed because I believe it is so telling. The past few years have seen an increasing amount of interest manifested in mental health and psychiatry. The existing legal procedures treat people with mental illnesses as criminals instead of people who are ill. Booking a person with mental illness at a police department or jail is unnecessary and undesirable. Police officers should be replaced by trained representatives of hospitals to effect the transfer of patients from their homes to the hospital or from one hospital to another. All laws concerning mental illness should be integrated to eliminate inefficiency and duplication. In the past, psychiatry has suffered because of its isolation from general medicine. Integrating psychiatry into the general practice of medicine is in line with modern trends of medical education and hospital practice. The article goes on and talks about the necessity of community education and how we need to educate parents and children and teachers, physicians, judges and jurists, clergy, employers, employees, and the public in general. And these are just a few of the comments and recommendations that were published in the American Journal of Psychiatry in January of 1939. 83 years ago, we figured out what to do. The answers have been in front of us for 83 years, but we have failed to act. You know, the history of mental illness is sad, it's long, it's tortured. And when we founded this country, we didn't know what to do with people with mental illnesses, so we just put them in jail. And it lasted that way until the early 1800s, when this wonderful woman, Dorothea Dix, visiting a jail in Boston, found these men freezing to death in jail. And they were there not because they had committed any offenses, they had not, but the jailer wasn't getting paid to keep them because they hadn't committed any offenses. And she started this whole movement of moral treatment. And the idea was to take people from these terrible jails and put them in these nice asylums, these 120-bed asylums, and allow them to be treated humanely. But sadly, there was no oversight, there was no real treatment, and these facilities grew into these massive, massive facilities, almost these human torture facilities. And so, between deinstitutionalization combined with the war on drugs and the war on crime and sentencing guidelines and massive cuts in the 80s, we created the perfect storm that we have today. In 1955, there were 560,000 people in state psychiatric hospitals and less than 5,000 people with mental illnesses behind bars. Today, we have less than 40,000 people in state hospitals, yet almost the same number of people who would have been in hospitals today had the system not changed, and I'm not saying it shouldn't have because it needed to, but almost the same number of people who would have been in hospitals are in jails today, about 1.5 million arrests. Since 1955, the number of hospital beds, psychiatric hospital beds, have decreased by 90%, while the percentage of people going to jails and prisons has grown by 400%. And so the two sad ironies one was we never deinstitutionalized. What we really did is we allowed for the transfer of responsibilities from these terrible state psychiatric hospitals to these terrible state jails and prisons. And in many ways, we've made matters worse. Because now, not only do you have to deal with the stigma of having a serious mental illness, now you have a criminal record where it makes it harder for you to get housing, it makes it harder for you to get employment, and it makes it more likely you're going to continue to live a life of crime in the criminal justice system. And the sadder and more cruel irony, I think, is that we have come full circle. Almost 200 years have now passed, and our jails, again, are the primary warehouses for people with mental illnesses. It's the one area in civil rights in this nation that we have gone backwards on, and we have failed those with mental illnesses miserably. As a consequence, we have seen homelessness increase, we've seen police injuries increase, we've seen police shootings of people with mental illnesses increase. We've wasted critical tax dollars, and in many ways, we have made mental illness a crime in this nation. In my state, the police actually initiate more involuntary examinations for civil commitment than the total number of arrests that they make for robbery, burglary, and grand theft auto combined. And if this wasn't disturbing enough, let's just consider the fiscal impact this is having on our local and state budgets. Competency restoration. I heard your governor talk about having to give more money to restore more people. That's a really tough thing to have to do because the outcomes of restoration are horrific. It doesn't really do much. In my state, 15 years ago, we had run out of competency restoration beds. And we found at the time that our state was spending 1/3 of its entire adult mental health budget, which was about $200 million, to restore competency for about 2,500 people. Now, maybe that would be okay if those 2,500 people had committed heinous, horrible acts. But what we found is that for 80% of the people we restored, one of three things happened. They had their charges dropped, they received credit for time served, or they received probation, and they walked out of the courthouse without any access to treatment. Sometimes getting arrested before they even hit the street, because in many times they were worse off than when they had first come into our system. Now that's the definition of insanity, where we keep doing the same thing again and again, and we expect a different outcome. And if this wasn't bad enough, just consider the fiscal impact to our prisons. Historically, in Florida, the fastest growing subpopulation are people with serious mental illnesses. So over about a 10-year period, our population for our jail grew by about 56%. For that same period of time, inmates experiencing moderate to severe mental illnesses increased by 170%. It is growing so fast, not just in my state, but in most states, that if we don't do something soon to change that trajectory, Florida's going to have to build 10 new prisons over a 10-year period just to house its mental health population. Now, they're not committing very serious offenses. If you look at the data, the average stay for them is only 2.5 to 4 years. We have sentencing guidelines, so they're just picking up so many little things that by the time they get charged with a low-level felony, they end up with a short prison sentence. Well, the cost to build and operate 10 prisons over 10 years is almost $2.5 billion. Could you imagine what we could do with a fraction of that for this population to keep them from ever going there to begin with? There's something wrong with a society that's willing to spend more money to incarcerate people that are ill than to treat them. So where do we start? It really starts at the local level, and that's what's the genius of this event today, because all of you are here in teams from every part of your state in every judicial circuit. Because as your chief mentioned, each community has to build a system that works for them. What works in one community isn't necessarily going to work the best for somebody else. But there are certain principles that we can take away from this, that we can apply, that we know through years of research and years of data that can make a significant change. And while more and more judges are becoming involved in this issue, as I said earlier, the reality is that none of us can fix this problem alone. It's going to take this collaboration between the judiciary and all the non-traditional stakeholders, such as law enforcement, your prosecutors, your public defenders, your corrections, your Department of Children and Families, your local and county governments, your mental health providers, your primary health providers, your hospital administrators, family members, and people with lived experiences. For many years, there was a recognition in my own community that our forensic mental health system was frankly a disaster and an embarrassment and in need of a total overhaul. My journey actually into the mental health world, other than my experience at 17, but as a judge, began one morning when I was getting ready to go on the bench. At the time, judges in Florida had absolutely no training on how to identify people with mental illnesses, what to do with people with mental illnesses. My education went something like this. If you see somebody act strange or bizarre, order a psychological evaluation. That was the extent of my training. I wasn't even sure what I was supposed to do when the evaluation came back. So at the time, I was handling a misdemeanor jail division. So 3 kinds of people in a misdemeanor jail division. These are people with very low offenses that are still in custody because they either have attached felonies and they're not allowed out, they're too poor and they cannot afford a bond out, but mostly it was just people with serious mental illnesses that didn't know how to get out. So getting ready to go on, the assistant public defender and the assistant state attorney come to my chambers and say, Judge, there's a couple out here, their son's in custody on a case you're going to hear today, and we would really like you to speak with them if that's okay. I'm like, sure, bring them in. Lovely couple came in, very sophisticated and very distraught. The mom was crying, the dad was shaking, and they literally began to beg me to get their son help. They told me that their son was brilliant. He had gone to Harvard. He had a late onset of schizophrenia. He was now homeless and cycling through the criminal justice system, and they just didn't know what to do. I was pretty new at the time, and I think when you're a new judge, you think you have a lot more power and a lot more wisdom than you really do. You can laugh, it's true. And I just assumed that we had a mental health system because we deal in logic. And I assumed that if you got arrested, we would have, and you had a serious mental illness and you were psychotic, we would have a system to put you in, because I knew if you got arrested and you had a heart attack, we had a healthcare system to put you in. We weren't going to let you lay there and rot and die. So why would we do that with someone who's psychotic? So I promised them, I made one of those rookie mistakes. I promised them that I would get their son help. And as I started to go back into the courtroom, the mom stopped me and she said, Judge, there's one more thing I need to tell you about my son. She said, not only is he brilliant, but respectfully, he probably knows more about the mental health system than you do. I looked at her, I wasn't clear what she was trying to tell me. I think she assumed that the lawyers had told me the whole story. They had not. I said, excuse me? She said, oh, you see, my son, he's the former head of psychiatry at Jackson Memorial Hospital, our largest public hospital in Florida. He had a late onset of schizophrenia. He didn't show up to work one day, and we had no idea what happened to him. Turns out he cashed in his life insurance policy. He was having religious ideations and thought he needed to be closer to God. So he got on an airplane and he flew to Israel. And within 3 weeks, the Israelis deported him because he was running around naked in the Orthodox sections of Jerusalem. And since he came back, he's been homeless, just cycling in and out. And Judge, we just don't know what to do. I was terribly taken back. I went in and I called his case, and he stood. Now, I have to tell you, I don't remember the exact charge he was on because I didn't know his case was going to change my life. But I don't think it was a statutory offense. I think it was one of those local county ordinance that homeless people often get picked up with. Ours is possession of a dairy cart. That's what we use. And I found that the police often do this because they were under the same misconception as I was, that if they picked people up and got them arrested, they would get them treated. So he stands and we start to talk and we have an amazing conversation. He's coherent, he's thoughtful, he's more respectful than the lawyers, thinking, hey, seems okay to me, except when I looked at him, he looked like a homeless guy that hadn't bathed in months. And he said, Judge, I didn't do this. Whatever I've been charged with, it's a ridiculous charge. He says, nobody goes to jail on this because you have really dangerous people you need my bed for. Why are you holding me on this ridiculous charge, which was perfectly sane and rational? I'm thinking, man, maybe something's wrong with his parents. He seems fine. I said, can I ask you a question? He said, sure, Your Honor, anything. I said, I just don't understand one thing. You keep insisting there's absolutely nothing wrong with you, that you don't have any type of mental illness. And he told me, look, Judge, I'll even go see a psychiatrist. Just let me out. I'll get evaluated. I'll come back. He knew the whole system. Mom was right. He knew more than I did. I said, I just don't understand this one thing. I said, if you really don't have a serious mental health issue, why would a Harvard-educated psychiatrist be in jail, cycling through the criminal justice system, being here today? All of a sudden, he got a look that I will never forget to the day I die. It was a look of complete terror and fear. It's a look that somebody must have right before they think they're going to die. And all of a sudden, he starts cupping his ears because he's hearing voices. And all of a sudden, he starts to shake back and forth. And he goes into a full-blown psychotic episode. And he starts screaming at the top of his lungs. And he starts to point to the back of the room where his parents were. And he starts yelling at the top of his lungs. And everything is in sixes. Your Honor, Your Honor, Your Honor, you have to have the culprit removed. You have to have the culprit removed. You have to have that culprit removed. I said to him, aren't those your parents? No, 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 no. Real parents, real parents, real parents. Died. Holocaust, 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 Holocaust. And they're from the CIA. And they came to kill me, kill me, kill me, kill me, kill me. Well, the only thing I knew to do, because he certainly was acting strange and bizarre, was to order a psychological evaluation for competency. I immediately order evaluation. 3-4 weeks go by. He's now in jail, 4 or 5 weeks on possession of a dairy cart. Came back and said not only was he incompetent to stand trial, but he even met criteria under our very high standard of civil commitment because he was imminently dangerous to himself or others. At the time, I needed 3 evaluations to get a stipulation from the lawyer, so I ordered 2 more. Now he's in jail 10 to 12 weeks on possession of a dairy cart. All 3 evaluations come back. They all say the same thing. And I'm like, oh, this is great. He's incompetent. I'm going to get jurisdiction of this guy. I'm going to get him treated. I'm going to be a hero. I'm going to live happily ever after. I'm never going to have to deal with mental health again. This is in 2000. I hand the evaluation to the lawyers. They immediately stipulate that he is incompetent to stand trial. I figure, well, I guess I'm supposed to send him somewhere. So I order him into hospitalization, or at least begin to. I look down, and the assistant public defender has a little grin on her face. Now, I will tell you, as a former assistant public defender, it's a really bad sign. And then she utters those magic words that the judges in here will appreciate more than the rest of you. She said to me, Your Honor, in all due respect, look, we know it has nothing to do with respect when you tell it to us, okay? You're an idiot and you don't know what you're doing. Okay, fine. She hands me this Florida Supreme Court opinion that literally had come out about 50 days earlier. And what did it say? It said county court judges, of which I am, have absolutely no legal authority to involuntarily commit anybody, and that my only option was to release him to the street, tell him to go see a doctor and come back. Exactly what he had told me some 14 weeks earlier. And there's a footnote in the case that says something like, we know this isn't a really good opinion, and we strongly urge the Florida legislature to address this issue. That was in 2000. This is 2021. Very little has changed. Not only was I not able to fulfill the promise that I made to his parents, but I allowed a psychotic, ill man who was imminently dangerous to himself or others back to the street. None of us go into these professions to be part of that kind of problem. I put community at risk. I put him at risk. I probably put my job at risk. God forbid something happened. But I followed the law that day. And I was determined never, ever to be in that position again. I'm going to show you a short video that was produced by my local CBS affiliate that shows you what our jail used to look like. It's not pretty. If you're squeamish or you have had trauma, you may not want to watch. But it really gives you a pretty good idea of what we're dealing with in our local jails. Please run the video.
Now, live. This is CBS 4 News at 11.
Life here is dirty, deplorable, dangerous. CBS 4 takes you to a place cameras are rarely allowed to reveal what's happening in our downtown jail to the inmates on the forgotten floor.
The people who spend their days and nights in these jail cells all suffer from mental illness. They're accused criminals, not guilty in the eyes of the law, but forced to live in conditions you cannot imagine.
Our chief investigative reporter, Michelle Gillen, has been given unprecedented television access to reveal what's going on. Michelle joins us now, and I was shocked, to say the least, when I saw this.
I think certainly it is time for the public to see what is going on. The pictures you are about to see are indeed haunting and most disturbing. Hundreds of men with mental illnesses, many crammed into tiny cells. Some arrested for minor crimes that advocates say would have the average person out of jail in just hours. But incredibly, there is no place to send them. Tonight, our cameras take you inside a world rarely exposed, the forgotten floor.
And then they get thrown into a cell.
I can't breathe it now.
Prison insiders call this the forgotten floor, but it seems unimaginable that the horrendous, be it horrifying conditions of a jail spilling over with inmates suffering from mental illnesses could be erased from any sane man's mind. As frigid air is pumped into sealed cells, some beg for help for the barest of necessities, water. The faucets are dry. The water's not working.
The water's not working. He's drinking sewer water. He's drinking toilet water out of the toilet.
We'll get you water. It doesn't work, the faucets. The faucets aren't working.
These stench-filled cells were designed for one person, outfitted with only a single steel shelf for a bed.
In this one, there's 3 inmates in a cell for one.
Yet 2, 3, sometimes even 5 men diagnosed with mental illnesses, in most cases arrested for low-level felony crimes, in some cases misdemeanors, are locked up for days, weeks, months.
Tell me about you. Tell me, living in this, what do you want the public to know tonight?
I want the public to know that people in here, they're urinating on the floor, and we have to sleep on top of it. They're defecating on the floor, and you have to sleep on top of it. There's only one bunker that's made of steel.
How many people are in your cell?
There is 4 in here right now.
They are only allowed out of their cell for 15 minutes 2 times a week.
30 minutes a week they're allowed out.
So other than a half an hour,
That's it.
this is it. They
Right.
are in this room.
Lights are on 24/7. The conditions you see just do not change.
I've been in Vietnam. I've 18 months in Vietnam. It's worse conditions in here. I wouldn't put a dog in here.
A chilling perspective from the jail's chief psychiatrist, Dr. Joseph Portier.
You would think that in 2006, we would treat people with chronic mental illness in a much better, more humane manner. But unfortunately, we're reverting back to how it was in the 16 and 1700s, which is terrible. It's morally incomprehensible.
A sentiment echoed by an outraged Miami-Dade County Judge, Steve Leifman.
This is like a secret that people don't know about.
It's a bad secret, and it's a sad secret.
What most of you don't know is that the Miami-Dade jail now serves as the largest psychiatric facility in the state of Florida. 3 of 9 floors, burgeoning with inmates suffering from mental illnesses, and according to Leifman, in desperate need of treatment. Not this type of confinement designed to punish people.
5 times as many people in our jail with mental illness than any psychiatric hospital in Florida. 5 times.
In this, right here.
Right here.
An elderly man emerges from the dirt and darkness.
There's 1 on the floor underneath the bunk and 1 or 2 standing around waiting for their turn to sleep.
And the crisis has unfolded across the state. In other Florida jails where they strive to comply with all the national standards for housing inmates, frustration over the virtual abandonment of mentally ill inmates left by the state to languish in jail cells for months runs deep. Colonel David Parrish.
Can you imagine the chaos that would result in the local criminal justice system if I stood at the booking door and said, sorry, we don't have any more room, we're not taking them from you, law enforcement?
Parrish from Hillsborough County says local authorities had no choice but to sue the state of Florida to force the Department of Children and Families to comply with their legal mandate to transfer mentally ill inmates to a treatment facility within 15 days.
Jails should not be the de facto mental health facility for a county, but that's what they are in the United States.
You had your birthday here. How old were you?
I was 21.
21.
Yes, ma'am.
And you've been here 8 months.
Yes, ma'am.
In Pinellas County, the weight of incarcerating and caring for mentally ill inmates had everyone paying a price, an unacceptable one, according to Major Kirk Brunner.
We are not a treatment facility, and these people that you saw in Delta 1, the one that talked his eye out, they need to be in a treatment facility, which is the responsibility of the state, not our responsibility.
And therein lies the danger. William Weaver Sr. was caring for his 40-year-old son Bill at home, a son he says suffered from schizophrenia but functioned well for decades until his medicine was changed. Then one night, according to police records, he attacked his elderly father, who called police and urged them to arrest his son, hoping this would trigger treatment.
Because he was under the false idea that if he got arrested, he'd get treatment.
Bill ended up locked up in a cell on floor 9 of the Miami-Dade pretrial detention center for several months. According to authorities, Bill jumped from this top bunk bed, cracking his skull and breaking his neck. He's now a quadriplegic who needs hospitalization to stay alive. We met up with his father, who had just left his hospital bed.
Do you think anything has come from what the incident of what your son went through?
Nothing. Nothing's changed. Do I think something could change? I don't know. I don't know. It's time. It's time something changed. But I don't know if it ever will.
Pretty sad and tragic look at the state of our mental health system, not just in Miami, but around the country. Tragically, the young man in the video passed away as a result of his injuries. I believe his father may have passed away a year or two later as a result of a broken heart. And tragically, the reporter passed away last year, who did an amazing job to open our eyes in our community to help us address this issue. Things do change. That terrible floor was closed in our jail, but the answer isn't building better jails. The answer is developing a system of care so people don't end up in our jails, and when they do, developing a system of diversion so that we can help people get access to treatment. Our community mental health system, our crisis system, and our commitment laws are antiquated and fragmented and do not reflect modern research and science and are in great need of reform. I've been doing this now 21 years, and it has become quite evident to me that if we treated people with primary health issues the way we treated people with psychiatric issues, not only would there be a plethora of civil lawsuits in this country, there would probably be indictments for gross negligence. What other illness is it okay to discharge people in the middle of the night, floridly psychotic, and then blame them for not getting better? We began our reform in June of 2000. We were very fortunate. The first national meeting of its kind like this was in Miami. And I went, and it was like a religious revival. It was like the first time I heard people talking about this issue with real solutions and real ideas and real approaches to help us fix it. And it's good to be judged. I begged them for help. They gave me a grant that year. And we had this wonderful summit like you're doing today. In the first half of our summit, we spent mapping out the intersection between the criminal justice system and the community mental health system. And what we found is that we were embarrassingly dysfunctional. We, the healthy people, had developed a system to fail perfectly, and it perfectly failed. Just like that example I gave you with the psychiatrist, we were spending almost $2 million a year of county dollars on psychological evaluations for misdemeanors so we could release them back to the street once they were adjudicated incompetent. But this wasn't a system that it's nefarious or one person is doing this or it's intentional. The problem was there's no one party, or not party, one person or institution that is looking at the entire system as a whole. The judges are judging, the police are policing, prosecutors prosecuting, defenders defending, and nobody is looking at the entire system when in fact this one person is accessing the resources of everybody in this room. So as a result of this summit, we created a two-part approach. And if I were to do this again, I would have a three-part approach, which I will explain in a minute. This wasn't about setting up a mental health court. Mental health courts can help, but they're not the whole answer because they only usually handle about 0.1% of the people that need help, and often they don't help the right 0.1%. They're taking the easy cases where the research tells us those folks don't need our supervision at all. They're going to be just fine without us. It's the moderate to higher risk individuals that need court intervention to get the outcomes that we need. So if I were to do it again, the third part would be a school-based pediatric approach. Trauma is a huge part of this problem. 92% of all the women in jail in the United States with a serious mental illness have horrific histories of trauma, mostly sexual abuse. 75% of men who are in jail, in prison in the United States with serious mental illness have horrific histories of trauma, sometimes sexual abuse, more likely to be victims of domestic violence, or witnesses to horrible violent crimes, just like a soldier might see in combat. Trauma is physiological, it is not emotional. It creates a change in your brain activity as a result of too much cortisol. And so if I were to start again, I would have had our school board folks there, our superintendent, and we would have been offering ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experience Assessment, for most middle school kids, so we could get ahead of this and not allow people to get into the criminal justice system. So the two-system approach was a pre-arrest diversion system. We looked around the country, and to us, the best program came out of Memphis, Tennessee, Crisis Intervention Team Policing. We now have the largest trained squad of CIT officers in the country. I have over 7,600 officers trained at all 36 of my departments. Over the last 10 years, my two largest out of the 36 handled 105,268 mental health calls. And out of those 105,268 calls, they only made 198 arrests. The number of arrests in Miami-Dade County went from 118,000 a year to 53,000 before COVID. We have saved the jail and the county 300 years of jail bed days just through our CIT program. Our police injuries almost stopped. Police shootings almost stopped. Why? Because we also realize that our law enforcement officers have horrific PTSD. 20% of all police departments have terrible PTSD issues. And it explains tragically why last year more officers died from suicide than in the line of duty. So what did we do? Because woman that runs my program, she gets 150 calls a month from police officers for their own personal mental health issues. They won't go to their departments for help. So we set up a treatment program outside police departments with the permission of the departments to help our officers get the treatment they need. And it has made them so empathetic and so understanding that you're now the cool cop if you get punched or hit by somebody with a mental illness and you don't arrest. And you're kind of the wimp if you get touched by somebody with a mental illness and you do arrest, and we can see it in our data. Our police shootings from one department went from 90 shootings in 5 years before CIT to 30 the following 5 years after CIT to 12 during the last 5 years. We also set up a post-arrest diversion system. We changed the screening tools at our jail. So now if you get arrested in Miami on a misdemeanor and you have a serious mental illness, no longer do we order competency evaluations. We do assessments for your illness to see if you're meeting criteria for our program. And what we do is if you do and you meet criteria, Within 3 days of your arrest, we send you to a crisis stabilization unit. And because you're on a criminal hold, our 72 hours of our civil law doesn't apply. We reset the case for 2 weeks, which is what most of this population really needs. And they begin to compensate, and they begin to be in an environment where they're treated humanely. And they begin to take medication. And once they begin to stabilize, someone from our team goes over and meets with them, and they're all trained in motivational techniques. And they say, look, if you come into our program, we're not going to rebook you. We're going to take you right to the courtroom. And when they get to the courtroom, one of our 8 peer specialists are waiting for them, people with lived experiences. 4 of them graduated from our program. What we found is that for so many of these folks who have these serious mental illnesses, by the time they get arrested, they have clinical depression on top of their mental illness. It's not that they don't want to take medication. They don't care if they breathe. And what the peers do so brilliantly is help reestablish relationships with them to incentivize them to want to get better. And it's a good incentive not to go back to jail. They're sick, they're not stupid. And when they get to court, the peers waiting for them with medication, with clothes, with food, with transportation. The county gave us a car for transportation, and we have housing set up. It's not rocket science. It's just setting up warm handoffs to make sure people get what they need to recover. And boy, did it work. Our recidivism rate our misdemeanor recidivism rate went from 75 to 20%. The state attorney was like, whoa, maybe this is how you really improve public safety. So she allowed and agreed for us to expand it to felony cases. Our felony diversion program saw the same thing happen. Recidivism went from 70 to 25%. Our felony diversion program alone has saved the county 84 years of jail bed days. Look, we know we still have a long way to go, but we've been able to close one of our 3 jails. And when we talk about that, that's usually cost shifting, except when you close a jail, that's cost savings. We have saved the county $12 million a year for 8 years, $96 million, and boy, do they like us. You want to get politicians to favor you, help them save money. And it's working so well that they're reinvesting a lot of that money, and they are now allowing us to build, and it'll be done in a couple months, the first of its kind mental health diversion facility in the country. This one-stop shop, 180,000 square foot facility will have a receiving facility, a crisis stabilization unit, a short-term residential facility, a day activity program run by people with mental illnesses to teach self-sufficiency, a culinary supportive employment program to teach job opportunities. It'll be a medical home. It'll have primary health, dental, eye, podiatry. It'll have a courtroom in the building so that we can manage these cases, and it has 200 beds of housing. And so instead of just kicking people to the curb once we've adjudicated their case, we can gently reintegrate them back into the community with all the supports that they need to maintain their recovery. And we've only been able to do this because of all the other pieces of the puzzle we have put together. I am convinced that once we get this opened, and once you start to do what you're going to do, that we will finally achieve what we needed to achieve when the court started to order deinstitutionalization. Thank you very, very much, and I wish you all the very, very best. Sorry, we're gonna go over. We have time for questions, or are we good?